Okay, today we're going to be covering the neuron, which is the nerve cell, and the brain. So let me pull up a picture here that we are going to look at first. Okay, so on this picture, what we're seeing is the organization of a nerve cell called a neuron. And you'll see it's very similar to what we discussed when we were talking about the muscle cells and the organization of a muscle cell. You had, in the muscles, you had the entire muscle, then you pulled out a bundle called a fascicle, and then you pulled out one muscle fiber or muscle cell out of that fascicle. And that's what you're seeing here in this picture. So let me get my little pen, and we'll look at this. Okay, so right here where I'm drawing the one, all right, let me draw a bracket. Okay, so all of that, where you see that green bracket, that is one nerve cell, and a nerve cell is called a neuron. And then you'll see within that neuron, we have, I'm drawing some green circles around the fascicle. So there's one fascicle. Here is another fascicle. Here is another fascicle. Okay, and then I'm going to draw, or I'm going to trace the nerve cell in red. So down here is one nerve cell being pulled out of a fascicle. Okay, so again, over here where our green bracket is, so all of this all together would be one nerve cell or a neuron. Then you see traced or circled in a green color, each one of those is going to be a fascicle. And then, so this one right here, I'm going to put this one in blue. So right here, you can see I've circled it in blue right here. This is one fascicle that has been pulled out of a neuron or a nerve, okay? Excuse me. Or not a neuron, pulled out of a nerve cell or a nerve bundle, okay? So again, all of this is a nerve. You have the green circles called fascicles. You'll see I pulled this one out here that's traced in blue, that's a fascicle. And then in red down here, this is a nerve cell called a neuron that has been pulled out of that fascicle. And if you remember back from our muscle unit, we also talked about those protective covering layers that wrapped around each one of these organizational levels. And it was the epimysium, the paramysium, and the endomysium. Well, you have very much the same type of thing here, but instead of mysium, which designates muscle, you have neurium. Neurium designates that it's a nerve cell. So you'll see here you have, right here, I'm underlining the word here, you have the epineurium. The epineurium is around the entire nerve, okay? So it's on the very outside. Epi means to sit upon or sit above. Then you have the perineurium. Perineurium, peri means to go around. So the perineurium is going to go around the fascicle. And then the last protective covering you have is this endoneurium. Endo means on the inside. So the endoneurium is going to be that covering on the farthest inside level we can get. So the endoneurium is going to cover one neuron or nerve cell. Okay, let me erase all this. Okay, now we're going to, I'm going to take this little picture away and we're going to go to our model. Okay, so this model right here that you're seeing, this is a model of a neuron or nerve cell. Okay, so this is the neuron. So all of this is a neuron, and you can see that it goes to this backdrop. All of this is the neuron as well. And it's showing this neuron sitting really close to this muscle cell. So all of this in red back here is the muscle cell, okay? Now you remember that we had the ends of the nerve cell that was lying really, really close to the muscle cell, and that would release your neurotoxins. That's what you're seeing here. You're seeing the release of those neurotoxins, okay? So again, all of this is a neuron. So this is your neuron model. All of this right here where you see the nucleus and all of your endoplasmic reticulum and your mitochondria, this area right here is called the soma or the cell body. So on the practical, make sure you put that this is the soma. Then you have these hard appendages here that come off. These hard appendages are going to be the dendrites. And these rubbery appendages, these are going to be your axon terminals. Okay? These are actually going to be coming from another neuron. So the tail of another neuron comes in and it's going to end in these little knobby ends called an axon terminal. Okay. Right here, this is your axon hillock. That's the swollen end that comes off of the soma or the cell body, and will then go into this long blue tube, and it'll go through, the blue tube will go through all this. That long blue tube is the axon. Surrounding the axons, you have these jelly rolls of fat or insulators. These cells are called Schwann cells, and I'm going to pull one of these off so you can see the jelly roll of the Schwann cell. So these protective layers are called a myelin sheath. So if they ask you what these layers are called, it's myelin sheath. If they ask you what, put it back on here, what cell this is a Schwann cell. So you can see one Schwann cell here and one Schwann cell here. Now in the middle of our Schwann cells, you'll see that the Schwann cell ends and there's a little gap between the two Schwann cells. This is going to be our node of Ranvier, okay? So that's our node. And from node to node, this area is called an internode, okay? So again, the swollen area is the axon hillock. The long blue tube is called the axon. This cell is called a Schwann cell. The layers here are called the myelin sheath. This gap between your two Schwann cells, this gap is called the node of Ranvier. And from node to node, that length is called an internode. Okay. Now back here, you will see that your tail or your axon goes between all of these Schwann cells, and you can see it going back in here. You can see that this comes out of a fascicle. Let me scoot it up so you can see it a little bit better. So you can see this one neuron is coming out of this group right here. This bundle is called a fascicle right here. And you can see fascicles, 1, 2, 3 fascicles there. So this is a 4th fascicle. So this is going to be a nerve. And then you'll see that it'll go to the end, and then you will have the end of the nerve separating into these fingers. These fingers are called your talindria. And at the end of these fingers, you have your axon terminals. So this axon terminal from one cell will come in and it will sit on top of another nerve cell. So that's what you see here. You're seeing those talindria right here coming in and the axon terminal lying close to another nerve cell. Because remember, your nerve cells have to talk to each other or communicate with each other. Okay, so again, all of this right here, this big rounded area, this is going to be the soma, which is the cell body. It's going to house your nucleus, your Golgi body, your endoplasmic reticulum, your mitochondria. All that's going to be located in this soma. The hard extensions coming off this soma are going to be the dendrites. And these dendrites are going to receive information from other nerve cells. Then you have the axon terminal coming in from another nerve cell, sending information to these dendrites. The information gets processed in the soma. Then the message will get sent through this axon hillock right here. This is where the action potential is going to be generated. And then it will go through this long blue tail, and it goes all the way through all of this, and you'll see the long blue tail out here. That long blue tail is called the axon. Covering the axon, you have these cells called Schwann cells. So each of these are called Schwann cells. The Schwann cells are made up of layers and layers of the myelin sheath. In between the Schwann cells, you have this open area here called the node of Ranvier. And from one node to another node is called an internode. You can see the axon way over here, and you can see then it's going to end into these little fingers. These fingers are called the telendria. So each one of these is your telendria, and they're going to end in your axon terminals. Okay. Now, as far as the organization, all of this right here is the entire nerve. So covering this in a bright yellow here is going to be your epineurium. Then you pull out a fascicle. So you can see we've pulled out one of these fascicles, and you can see it pulled out here. So covering this fascicle is going to be a perineurium. And then covering, you can see it right here, right in there, covering each of the nerve cells or each of the neurons is going to be your endoneurium. So epineurium around the whole nerve. You pulled out one fascicle here. So around this fascicle is the perineurium. And then right in here, you've pulled out one nerve cell, and around the nerve cell is the endoneurium. So that is the nerve cell model or the neuron model. Okay. Now we're going to go on to the brain. Okay, so here's our brain, and we're going to look at it from the outside first, and then we'll dive into the inside. So all of this wrinkly area of the brain up here is called your cerebrum. And your cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres. So the right cerebral hemisphere and the left cerebral hemisphere. And when you put the right cerebral hemisphere and the left cerebral hemisphere together, you get the cerebrum. Okay. Now you can see from the front, this would be sticking up towards the forehead area here. This is going to be the back of the head. So in your occipital region of the skull, you have this baby brain down here. I'm going to turn it to the back so you can see it. This baby brain is called the cerebellum. Okay. So again, cerebrum is all of this wrinkly part, and your cerebellum is the baby brain that sits on the bottom. Okay. Your cerebellum is also split into two hemispheres, but for our lab, you don't have to know anything about that. You just have to know that this is the cerebellum. Cerebrum, cerebellum. Okay. Now you'll see in these wrinkles and these folds, you have this area right here that is raised. This is called your gyri or gyrus. Gyrus is singular, so this is one gyrus. This gyrus plus this gyrus plus this gyrus would be gyri, plural. Okay. So the raised areas are called gyri, and these sucked in indentation areas are going to be called sulcus or sulci. This is a sulcus, but this sulcus plus this sulcus plus this sulcus right here would be a sulci, plural. Okay. So again, the raised is gyri, the sucked in is sulcus. Okay. Then we have lobes of the brain. So if you remember your bones of the brain, then these are very similar. So you have the sitting like this. This is your frontal lobe. This is your temporal lobe. This is your occipital lobe. And then you have your parietal lobe on the top. Okay, so now let's talk about the deep lines that separate the brain. Okay, so remember we looked at the right and the left cerebral hemispheres. This deep division right here is going to be your longitudinal sulcus. I'm sorry, your longitudinal fissure, because it's really, really large, longitudinal fissure. Okay. Then when you turn the brain sideways, you can see this big line right here that's going to divide your frontal lobe from your parietal lobes. This large line right here is called your central sulcus. And this one here that divides your parietal and frontal from your temporal, this one is called your lateral sulcus. So again, longitudinal fissure separates your two hemispheres, longitudinal fissure. Then when you're looking from the side, you have the central sulcus, which separates the frontal lobe from your parietal lobes. And then you have the lateral sulcus, which is going to separate your temporal from your frontal and parietal lobes. Okay, now we're going to be looking on the inferior side of the brain. So up here was the top. So we're just going to be looking on the underneath or the inferior side of the brain here. So again, all of this wrinkly area here is going to be your cerebrum, and the baby brain down here is going to be the cerebellum. You'll see this swollen area right here. This swollen area is called the pons. Then there's kind of a little bulbous area right here. It's where my finger's covering. This is called the medulla oblongata. And then down here would be your spinal cord. So all of this swollen area here, pons. This secondary swollen area right here that my finger's covering right now, right here, where the finger is covering, that's the medulla oblongata right there. And then down here would be the spinal cord. You're also seeing some structures up here that we also have. Okay, so right here, you're seeing these tall sticks. At the end of these sticks, these are called your olfactory bulbs. You'll see it's a little swollen at the end. Again, at the end is the olfactory bulb. The sticks that the olfactory bulb sits on, these are your olfactory tracts. Then here is going to be your optic nerve, both sides. So this optic nerve and this optic nerve will go to the back of the eye. Then between, let me see if I can get a pointer here and move it up. Between those optical nerves, you'll see that bridge right there where that blue highlighter is touching. That is going to be your optic chiasm. So you have, I don't know why it's so, there we go, it's focused in a little bit better. So we have one optic nerve, two optic nerves, and then that white bridge right there between the optic nerves, that's your optic chiasm. Okay. Then on this pons area, you can see a nerve coming off at the top here. This is going to be your trigeminal nerve. This is the only nerve y'all have to know on your pons for the practical. Okay. So there are other nerves that come off of the pons area, but the only one you have to know is this trigeminal nerve on either side of the upper part of the pons. Then we're going to go down to the medulla oblongata. Come on, focus in. Okay, well, it's not focusing really well, but this top notch right here on the medulla oblongata, this is going to be your vagus nerve. And this is the only nerve y'all have to know on this medulla oblongata. So this little extension that comes off of the medulla oblongata, this top extension right here that my fingernail is touching, is the vagus nerve. So let's go back over those. You have your olfactory tract, which is going to end in the olfactory bulbs. You have the optic nerves, these two white extensions here. Then you have the bridge between the optic nerve right here. That is going to be the optic chiasm. Then you have these two nerves coming off of the pons. These are going to be your trigeminal nerves. Then this first one coming off of the medulla oblongata here, that's going to be your vagus nerve. Then this structure hanging down from this stalk, if you remember, you talked about the pituitary gland early on in AP2. So that stalk is the infundibulum, and the little ball here is going to be your pituitary gland. Okay? You don't have to identify the infundibulum on this practical, but you are responsible for the pituitary gland. Okay, now we're going to crack this brain open and we're going to go over some structures on the inside. So you're seeing up here, you're seeing one of the cerebral hemispheres. And then here you're seeing the inside of the baby brain called the cerebellum. Okay. Okay, you still have this swollen area right here. This is going to be the pons. Then you have this secondary or smaller swollen area down here. This is going to be the medulla oblongata. And inferior to the medulla oblongata right here is the spinal cord. This is still your pituitary gland. Now let's go over some new structures. So this white arch here, this is called your corpus callosum. Then this depressed area right here is going to be your septum pellucidum. This white comma shape structure here is going to be the fornix. This darker pink comma shaped structure here, excuse me. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. So this is your choroid plexus. So again, the large white arch is called your corpus callosum. This depressed area right here, just under the corpus callosum, this is going to be your septum pellucidum. This white comma shaped structure here is going to be the fornix. This darker pink comma shaped structure here is going to be your choroid plexus. This little gland right here, this little gland is called the pineal gland. All of this area that has the, looks like a little nucleus here, all of this area right here with this little nucleus looking structure in the middle, all of that is called your thalamus. Now, just inferior to your thalamus right here, this is your hypothalamus. This is going to be part of that optic chiasm that we could see earlier on the outside of the brain. And again, your pituitary. So again, all of this up here would be your part of your cerebral hemisphere. So it's one of the cerebral hemispheres you're seeing up here. This is the baby brain called the cerebellum. This swollen area here is called the pons. The area just inferior to the pons is called the medulla oblongata. And right at the very end right here, just inferior to the medulla oblongata, is the spinal cord. This is the pituitary gland. This large white structure up here is the corpus callosum. This indented area right here is the septum pellucidum. This white comma shaped structure is the fornix. This pink comma shaped structure is the choroid plexus. This tiny little gland coming off of the inferior side of the choroid plexus, this is the pineal gland. This entire area right here is the thalamus. This area sits just inferior to the thalamus is the hypothalamus. This is the optic chiasm. And again, you can see the pituitary gland. You can also see the sucked in or indented areas. This is called a sulcus. And you can see the raised area called the gyri or gyrus. And that is the brain.